Someone walked up to me just 2 or 3 minutes ago and literally said these words. It says that there was a whole lot of Twitter going on in this room. And I thought that it was only right to sort of, well, come on over, baby. Whole lot of Twitter going on. Well, come on over, baby. Whole lot of Twitter going on. We ain't faking. Whole lot of Twitter going on. Someone has put up a tip jar on the.
Is that available on iTunes?
I'm not sure what the copyright implications are.
We have a book.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to thank my Poynter colleague, Ren Laforme, for helping me produce this talk. Ren, he's a great guy. Fantastic. Thank you very much. This is my first TED Talk ever, so I thought I'd give it a very simple title, Let Words Collide. But my ambitions got the best of me, so I added a subtitle. Towards a unified theory to explain the origins of all form of creative expressions. 3 exclamation points. So you tell me at the end whether you think I've come close. These ideas were inspired by 2 characters you are not likely to see mentioned in the same talk ever again. The first is pop singer, songwriter Billy Joel. We have a lot in common, Billy Joel and I. In 1966, we both were seniors in high school on Long Island. I graduated. We both married supermodels. I'm still married. We both have Jewish grandmothers. And we both play the piano, in which case he wins that trophy. The second is Peter Higgs, a physicist who in 1964 gave his name to a subatomic particle known as the Higgs boson. Except for the fact that their names scan like poetry, Billy Joel, Peter Higgs, what possibly could they have in common? And there's the rub. This TED Talk is going to be a little bit about the rub of creativity. I want you to rub yourself in a nice way. I want you to rub your fingers together, if you can. And I want you to feel that burn a little bit. Hold it up to your ear, because it's making a sound. Okay, there's the rub. So let's begin with Billy Joel, because he really inspired this, or better yet, his piano keyboard. I was privileged not that long ago to hear a lecture by Billy Joel to the music students at St. Petersburg College. And at one point during this lecture, he was illustrating something from the opening of one of his, I think his first hits, Just the Way You Are. And he played the opening. Let's do this thing. I like it better down here. And he was complaining that the musical transcribers had gotten it wrong. They had written it one way, and the sheet music people had done it another way. That he had written it this way. I'm sorry. Those 2 chords. But that it came out this way in the sheet music. Instead of, I don't know if you can hear the difference. I'll show you the difference in a second. He said that he was trying to, he said he wanted a little rub in there. That was his words. And that rub was created by a kind of a chord known as a suspended chord. This, instead of this. Or instead of this. I had no idea what he was talking about. But I learned. The tiniest of changes in a chord can have the most dramatic effects. So let's take the C major chord. Okay? All the world seems bright and gay with a major chord. Now, all I have to do is take that middle note and to move it down a half tone, And suddenly, I don't know if you can hear it or not, the lights go out in the room, you know? From there to this. So that "You Are My Sunshine" becomes "The Rains of Castamere." Okay? Now, a sus chord, a suspended chord, takes that middle note and raises it a half. So instead of this, you get this. Now, I played these for my daughter Allison one day, just to sort of see how they registered with Allison, who's a very creative person. And I said, "Allison, I'm going to play you a suspended chord. What does that sound like?" And she said to me, "Dad, it sounds as if something is about to happen." And I said, "Well, what does this sound like, this major chord?" "That sounds as if something just happened." From there to there. Let's look at the dictionary definitions. Suspension, the prolongation of one or more of the tones of a chord into a following chord to create a temporary dissonance, what Billy Joel called the rub. What happens is that chord cannot be allowed to last. It has to be resolved. The resolution is the progression of a dissonant tone to a chord to a consonant tone or chord. It suddenly occurred to me that Billy Joel was using some of the same language that we use in narrative theory and writing. His rub, his sus chord, his suspended chord was our suspense, that period of enforced tension in a story that seeks its own resolution. Suspense, resolution. Now, it just so happens, coincidence, that when I was learning about the magic of the sus chord, I was also reading some books, dabbling, if you will, in cosmology, the science of the universe, the theories of mathematics and physics behind it. All of that. In 2012, big news broke about new data on the so-called Higgs boson, controversially called the God particle, sometimes referred to physicists as the goddamn particle, because it's so hard to find. It's a subatomic particle that can help us solve a great mystery of the universe, how matter in all of its manifestations came into being. All things bright and beautiful. Remember, Ellen Angelotti, that you are stardust. I became fascinated by the notion that if you collided enough particles at high enough speeds, you'd be able to detect evidence of something real, but invisible and indescribable. We're not seeing the Higgs boson here in this image, but we're seeing the effects of the collision of subatomic particles. That idea in physics began to intrude into my thinking in language. In short, I wondered if the energy and matter created by a writer came from something so small that it could not be directly examined but only inferred by its effects. I'm speaking analogically or metaphorically. There is no actual phoneme or syllable collider under the Alps ready to reveal the secrets of style, rhetoric, news judgment, or literary meaning. In essence, each reader, each I have to become the collider. And there I am, the age of 2, sitting on Billy Joel grandmother's lap and thinking about these problems of the universe at a very early age. Words bump into each other through my eyes and ears and memory. I have a new book about to be published called How to Write Short, Wordcraft for Fast Times. And when you examine shorter texts, fewer words collide, leading me down to the subatomic level of language. But this exists at the macro level as well. The language forces of collision, the forces I seek to measure, can exist in a 1,000-page novel in the tension between the language of war and the narrative of war and peace. But they also work at the sentence level, at the phrase level, sometimes inside a word, sometimes inside part of a word. So it's time for the big reveal. The secret knowledge I seek, I now believe, is embodied and embedded. Can we have a drum roll, please? Right there. Hit it, Ren. In the number 2. Well, that was an anticlimax, wasn't it? Okay. Now, let's think about the power of 2. We already know that the power of 2, just 2 digits, 0 and 1, defines the binary information coding of computer science. Or as Keanu Reeves would say, whoa. And we know that it's not a quadruple or triple helix, it's a double helix that unlocks the secrets of our genetic identity. So in my mind, 2 has become the essential number to create meaning in all texts, most visibly in short texts. And we're going to look at 3 of them. Jesus wept, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. Is it possible to examine the effects of these combinations of words so closely that they would reveal a unified theory of language and literature, maybe of all creativity, with a few writing tips along the way? So let's begin with the Jesus wept effect. Arguably, I think probably measurably, the shortest and among the most memorable, most powerful sentences in religious literature. The context is the news that the cousin of Jesus, Lazarus, has died. Jesus will raise him from the dead, a foreshadowing of his own resurrection. But that act of divine power is preceded by one of deep human vulnerability. One cousin dies, another weeps. In that sense, Jesus wept can be seen as the narrative expression of a theological doctrine centuries in the making, the idea of the God-man, the dual nature of the Christ. Let's move now to a very different type of Savior. Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Lest you find this trivial or insignificant, turns out that Joss Whedon's story and narrative of Buffy is the most studied popular expression of popular culture in academic circles. Countless papers. Now, why? Well, until Buffy came along, vampire hunters in film and literature were older men, usually doctors or scientists with serious names, like Dr. Van Helsing. Thank you, Peter Cushing. Instead, we're given a blonde high school girl from Southern California with a name associated with the empty-headedness of the Valley Beach and Galleria culture. Watch any of the more than 150 episodes, and you come to realize that the entire narrative is contained in that kernel of the name, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. She has to find a dress for the prom and save the universe from the demons who have come into Sunnyvale. I am back to a kind of metaphor of collision, of energy, of rub. To make meaning, especially in literature, but I'm thinking also in music and in the visual arts, requires a bit of rub between the elements. No rub means no friction. No friction means no heat. No heat means no light. No light means no illumination. No seeing, no understanding, no meaning. Let's play this out in a longer phrase attributed to the young boxer Cassius Clay, who then changed his name to Muhammad Ali, who once said proudly, "Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee." I could argue that those 8 words form one of the greatest catchphrases in the history of sports. Now, the most obvious expression of two-ness in that sentence can be found in the parallel clauses. At first glance, they look perfectly parallel. Float equals sting, like a is repeated as the simile marker, and butterfly equals B. But while the patterns seem to repeat the power of language, the burn, the friction comes from the rub between the parallel elements. In pugilism, traditional figures were either boxers or punchers, but among the greatest were men who could combine dancing footwork and defense with knockout power, fighters who could float and sting. Butterfly and bee, at first glance, are marked by their similarities. They alliterate. Both are nouns that describe insects. Both are objects of the preposition. Both are second terms in a simile. But I feel a rub which has at least 4 sources. First is the length of the word butterfly versus bee. The second is the poetics of the word, a flowing word rather than one that just stops and sticks. The semantics. One, you try to catch. The other one, you run from. And in their connotations, the butterfly is seen as something beautiful, whereas the bee is something that will give you anaphylaxis if you're not careful. If my theory is, as I claim, unified, explaining all forms of creativity, then the tension in texts and in music must have equivalent forms of expression in the visual arts. Let's take, for example, the cover of my book, The Glamour of Grammar. Now, people say, why did you use the British spelling? Why did you add the U? It's because I wanted to show the similarity between the two words, glamour and grammar. Not only did they rhyme, but they had the same number of letters. That cover was designed by a prize-winning artist named Keith Woods, who is the kind of designer who actually reads the book before he does the images. And he picked up on the surprising rub in the title between the words glamour and grammar, which until the 14th century in England were the same word. You have to read the book to unpuzzle that one. But he represents that visually by creating the most spectacular semicolon in the history of publishing. An orange sphere that looks like a setting sun, and a comma that looks like the kind of meteorological event that happened yesterday in St. Petersburg. Can you find the rub in this prize-winning photo, taken supposedly without digital effects, but I'll let Kelly track that one down. What is going on here? Is something about to happen? Or something just happened? Is this suspense or is it resolution? Do you feel the rub between the vertical motion of the moon and the horizontal movement of the rider? Between the huge natural circle and the 2 man-made circles of the wheels? Between the light of the moon and the human shadow that eclipses it? What music would sound good behind it? A cheerful major chord? The melancholy minor? Hey, how about this one? Hey, I think something's about to happen. I think you all are about to applaud.